안녕하세요. 오늘은 보내두신 자료들, 그러니까 강의록이랑 교재 일부를 가지고 지그문트 프로이트의 성격 이론 속으로 한번 깊이 들어가 보려고 합니다. 가끔은 저 자신도 왜 이런지 모를 때가 있잖아요. 바로 그 행동 이면의 무의식적 동기, 프로이트가 그린 마음의 지도, 또 성격 발달 단계, 그리고 우리가 모르게 쓰는 그 방어 기제들까지 한번 파헤쳐보죠. 당신의 행동을 이해하는 새로운 열쇠가 될지도 몰라요. 자, 시작해볼까요? 우선 프로이트가 우리 마음을 어떻게 그렸는지 거기서부터 시작하는 게 좋겠네요. 의식, 전의식, 무의식. 특히 무의식이라는 개념이 정말 대단했다면서요?
네, 그렇죠. 지금 우리가 딱 인지하는 게 의식이고, 조금만 애쓰면 떠올릴 수 있는 기억 같은 게 전의식이라면요. 무의식은 진짜 깊은 곳이에요. 우리가 꺼내기 힘든, 어쩌면 억압된 욕망, 본능, 트라우마 같은 것들이 담겨 있는 곳이죠. 프로이트는 이걸 빙산에 많이 비유했잖아요. 물 위에 조금 보이는 게 의식, 그 아래 거대한 얼음덩이가 바로 무의식인 셈이죠. 그리고 여기에 더해서 성격 구조를 세 가지 힘이 싸우는 곳으로 봤어요. 원초와 아이디, 자아, 이고, 그리고 초자아, 슈퍼이고요. 원초아는 전적으로 무의식에 속하고 그 쾌락 원리에 따라서 그냥 지금 당장 만족을 얻으려고만 해요.
원초아는 그럼 뭐랄까, 브레이크 없는 자동차 같은 거네요?
네, 약간 그런 면이 있죠.
그럼 자아랑 초자아는 어떤 역할을 해요? 이 둘이 브레이크인가요?
자아가 이제 등장하는데 원초아에서 발달해서 현실 원리를 따라요. 그러니까 원초아의 충동과 외부 현실 사이에서 중재를 하는 거죠. 만족을 좀 미루고 현실적으로 어떻게 할지 계획을 세우고 이게 진짜 괜찮은 건지 현실 검증도 하고요. 예를 들어 수업 중에 배고프다. 이건 원초아 욕구잖아요.
네네.
근데 바로 뛰쳐나가진 않죠. 수업 끝날 때까지 참잖아요. 이게 자아의 통제 역할이에요.
아하.
초자아는 좀 더 나중에 발달하는데 부모님이나 사회의 규칙, 도덕, 이상 같은 걸 내 안에 받아들인 거예요. 양심이랑 자아 이상으로 구성되죠. 쾌락이나 현실보다는 이상, 완벽함 이런 걸 추구해요.
약간 도덕 선생님 같은 느낌?
맞아요. 성격의 도덕적인 부분이죠. 그래서 원초아의 용납 못할 욕구를 자아가 혹시 표현할까 봐 불안이나 죄책감을 느끼게 해서 경고를 보내요. 근데 여기서 중요한 건 성격의 최종 실행자는 초자아가 아니라 자아라는 점이에요. 자아가 결정하고 행동하는 거죠.
이야, 정말 마음속에서 이 세 힘이 계속 부딪히고 있겠네요, 그렇죠?
네, 끊임없이 갈등하죠.
이게 그 유명한 프로이트의 심리 성적 발달 단계랑도 연결되는 건가요?
맞습니다. 프로이트는 그 성적 에너지, 리비도라고 부르는 것이 직종되는 신체 부위가 달라지면서 성격이 발달한다고 봤어요. 5단계로요. 구강기, 항문기, 남근기, 잠복기, 생식기 이 순서대로 진행된다고 했죠. 특히 앞에 3단계, 그러니까 구강기, 항문기, 남근기가 성격 형성에 아주 중요하다고 강조했어요.
구강기는 입, 항문기는 배변, 남근기는 성기 쪽인가요?
네, 맞아요. 구강기, 18개월은 입으로 빠는 걸 통해 쾌락을 얻는데 이때 욕구가 너무 충족되거나 반대로 좌절되면 고착이 일어날 수 있어요. 그래서 어른이 되어서도 뭐랄까 좀 의존적이거나 아니면 반대로 논쟁적이고 비판적인 성격이 될 수 있다고 봤죠. 항문기 18개월에서 3세는 배변 훈련이 핵심이고요. 이때 처음으로 외부 통제를 경험하고 쾌락을 좀 미루는 걸 배워요.
이때 고집 같은 게 생기나요?
그렇죠. 이때 너무 엄격하게 훈련받으면 결벽증이나 인색한 성격, 이걸 항문 보유적 성격이라고 해요. 반대로 너무 풀어주면 지저분하고 충동적인 항문 공격적 성격이 될 수도 있고요. 그리고 남근기 3에서 6세에는 성기에 관심이 쏠리면서 남아는 오이디푸스 콤플렉스, 여아는 엘렉트라 콤플렉스를 겪는다고 봤죠. 거세 불안이나 남근선망 같은 개념도 이때 나오고요.
네, 이 부분은 특히 논란이 많았던 것 같아요. 저도 읽어봤는데.
맞아요. 특히 여아의 초자아 발달이 남아보다 부족하다거나 남근선망 개념 같은 건 좀 성차별적이라는 비판을 많이 받죠. 현대 심리학에서는 이런 부분을 많이 수정하거나 다르게 봐요.
그렇군요. 그럼 그 이후 단계들은 어떤가요? 잠복기랑 생식기.
잠복기 6에서 12세는 리비도가 좀 잠잠해지는 시기예요. 그래서 성적인 관심보다는 학업이나 친구 관계 이런 데 에너지를 쏟고 초자아가 더 강해지죠. 그리고 생식기 12세 이후는 사춘기가 오면서 다시 성적인 관심이 이제 이성에게 향하고 좀 더 성숙한 성적 정체성을 만들어 나가는 시기라고 봤습니다.
이런 복잡한 발달 과정에서 불안이 안 생길 수가 없겠네요. 그쵸. 그걸 다루려고 방어기제라는 걸 사용한다고요?
정확해요. 불안은 결국 원초와 자아, 초자아 사이의 갈등에서 오는 위험 신호 같은 거예요. 예를 들어 길 가다 진짜 뱀을 보면 놀라는 건 현실적 불안이고요. 시험 공부하기 싫은데 안 하면 망할까 봐 걱정하는 건 신경증적 불안, 원초와 자아 갈등. 또 떨어진 지갑 주워서 갖고 싶은 마음이 들지만 죄책감이 드는 건 도덕적 불안, 원초와 초자아 갈등이죠. 자아는 이런 여러 불안들을 다루려고 자기도 모르게, 그러니까 무의식적으로 방어 전략을 쓰는 거예요. 그게 바로 방어기제죠.
흥미롭네요. 우리가 흔히 쓰는 자기 합리화, 이런 것도 그런 방어기제인 건가요?
네, 대표서지죠.
몇 가지 더 알려주실 수 있나요?
합리화는 말씀하신 것처럼 실패나 잘못에 대해 그럴듯한 이유를 대는 거죠. 아, 시험 망친 건 컨디션이 안 좋아서 그래, 이런 거요. 가장 기본은 억압이에요. 받아들이기 힘든 생각이나 감정을 그냥 무의식 속으로 꾹 눌러버리는 거고요. 부정은 고통스러운 현실 자체를 아예 없는 것처럼 여기는 거예요. 예를 들어 시한부 선고를 받았는데 막 먼 미래에 화려한 계획을 세운다던가. 투사는 자기 문제를 남 탓으로 돌리는 거. 네가 잘못해서 그래, 이런 식으로요. 속담에도 있잖아요. 머무든 개가 겨무든 개 나무란다. 딱 그거죠.
네네.
퇴행은 스트레스 받으면 어린 시절 행동으로 돌아가는 거예요. 동생 태어나니까 갑자기 대소변 못 가리는 아이처럼요. 전치는 좀 덜 위협적인 대상한테 감정을 푸는 거, 회사에서 부장님한테 혼나고 집에 와서 괜히 만만한 가족한테 짜증내는 것 같은 거요.
종로에서 뺨 맞고 한강에서 눈 흘기는 격이네요.
그쵸, 비슷한 거죠. 그리고 승화라는 것도 있는데 이건 용납되기 어려운 충동 에너지를 사회적으로 괜찮은 활동, 예를 들어 예술이나 운동 같은 걸로 바꾸는 거예요. 가장 성숙한 방어 기제로 보죠. 보통 우리는 한 가지 방어 기제만 쓰는 게 아니라 여러 개를 동시에 사용해요. 그리고 이것도 자아가 사용하는 겁니다. 초자아가 아니고요.
듣고 보니까 진짜 많은 행동들이 이런 방어 기제로 설명될 수 있겠네요. 와, 프로이트 이론 이렇게 들어보면 참 강력한데 비판도 만만치 않다고 들었어요. 맞죠?
네, 그렇죠. 프로이트는 분명히 인간 행동 이면에 숨겨진 동기, 특히 그 어린 시절 경험의 중요성을 우리에게 알려줬어요. 이걸 정신결정론이라고 하죠. 그래서 심리학이나 정신치료는 물론이고 사회복지 실천에서도 클라이언트의 마음속 갈등을 이해하는 데 큰 영향을 줬습니다. 진단주의 학파의 이론적 기초가 되기도 했고요.
영향력은 엄청났군요.
네. 하지만 비판도 많아요. 인간을 너무 본능에만 휘둘리는 수동적인 존재로 본다는 점, 환경이나 개인의 자유의지 같은 건 좀 무시했다는 점, 그리고 아까 말했던 성차별적인 시각도 있고요. 무엇보다 그의 이론 대부분이 과학적으로 딱 검증하기가 어렵다는 게 큰 약점이죠. 그래서 융 같은 제자들도 리비도 개념을 좀 다르게 더 넓은 의미의 정신 에너지로 보기도 하는 등 다른 길을 가기도 했고요.
네. 오늘은 프로이트가 제시한 우리 마음속의 복잡한 세계, 그 작동 방식, 성격이 어떻게 형성되는지, 그리고 우리도 모르게 사용하는 방어 전략들에 대해 쭉 살펴봤습니다. 여전히 논쟁적이긴 하지만 우리 자신을 이해하는데 정말 강력한 질문들을 던져주는 것 같아요.
그렇습니다. 물론 현대에 와서는 수정되거나 비판받는 부분도 많아요. 하지만 나는 왜 이렇게 행동할까? 라는 질문에 대해서 내 안에 보이지 않는 마음의 힘 때문일 수 있구나. 라는 그런 관점을 처음 제시했다는 것만으로도 프로이트의 기여는 정말 크다고 할 수 있겠죠. 혹시 당신의 일상생활 속에서 이거 혹시 내가 지금 방어기제를 쓰고 있는 거 아닐까? 하고 느껴지는 순간은 없으신가요? 어떤 상황에서 자신도 모르게 스스로를 방어하고 있는 것 같나요? 한번 곱씹어 보는 것도 꽤 흥미로운 자기 탐색이 될 겁니다.
Welcome to this deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're looking at Sigmund Freud. We're going to use his ideas, his map really, to explore the fascinating and pretty complex territory of the human mind.
It's definitely complex territory.
We're diving into his big theories on personality. Thinking about those, invisible forces, unconscious drives, hidden conflicts, the things he thought make us who we are.
Yeah, and why we do what we do. Freud's impact was huge. I mean, his ideas get debated, changed, sure, but he really shifted how we even talk about the psyche.
He made us look under the surface.
Exactly. Beyond just the obvious behavior.
And for this exploration, we're drawing from the materials you shared, lecture notes, some textbook bits, and audio discussion too. Our goal, our mission, if you like, is to use this map from Freud to try and understand his view of the mind, how personality develops according to him, and maybe, just maybe, it gives you, the listener, a different lens to see some of your own actions.
Yeah, even the puzzling ones.
It might offer some clues.
It's like getting a sort of blueprint for our inner world, you know, with all its hidden rooms and conflicting energies.
Okay, let's start with that first part of the blueprint then. The map of the mind. Freud didn't see it as just one thing, did he? More like regions, levels.
Right, his topographical model. Think of it as having different levels of awareness. Parts you see clearly, parts just beneath, and in this huge, deep, hidden zone.
Okay.
So, the sources lay out three. First, the conscious. That's simple enough. It's what you're aware of right now. Your thoughts, what you're seeing, hearing.
The immediate stuff, the tip of the iceberg.
Is that the analogy used in the audio source? Yes. The conscious is just that small bit sticking out. Then just below the waterline is the preconscious.
Okay, what's there?
Memories, stored knowledge, things you're not thinking about this second, but you could pull up easily if you wanted to.
Like what I had for dinner last night.
Perfect example. It's accessible. You can bring it into conscious awareness.
Right. So conscious, preconscious, relatively easy to get to. But the biggest part of that iceberg.
That's the unconscious. According to Freud, this is the massive hidden bulk beneath the surface. It's where all the repressed stuff goes, desires we can't admit to, traumatic memories, powerful instinctual drives.
Wow.
He believed this is where the real action is, the forces shaping our behavior, often completely without our awareness.
So most of what drives us is hidden. That's a big idea.
It is, and it connects directly to how he saw personality itself, not as static, but as this kind of internal drawn.
In the battleground, you mentioned.
Yeah, that's his structural model. He proposed these three interacting parts or structures: the id, the ego, and the superego. Think of them as like three characters or forces inside you, always negotiating, sometimes clashing.
Okay, three forces, the id. That sounds like the demanding one.
Totally. The id is pure, raw instinct. It's entirely unconscious, and it runs on one thing: the pleasure principle. It wants immediate gratification. Now, whatever feels good, whatever satisfies a need or urge, the id wants it instantly, with zero thought for reality, consequences, or anyone else. The source material calls it a car without brakes.
Just pure drive.
Pure drive, no control.
So if it was just the ad running the show, we'd be, well, pretty chaotic. How do we manage in the real world?
Well, that's where the ego comes in. The ego develops out of the id, kind of like its reality-based offshoot. It operates on the reality principle.
Okay, reality principle. So it deals with the real world.
Exactly. Its job is to mediate. It has to balance the id's demands with what's actually possible and acceptable in the outside world. And later, it also has to deal with the superego's rules.
So it tries to get the id what it wants, but like realistically.
Yes, or it figures out how to delay gratification.
Yeah.
It uses reality testing. Can this plan actually work? Is it safe? If one way won't work, the ego tries to find another strategy to reduce that tension the id is creating.
So the id screams cake. Now, and the ego says, okay, hold on, we're in a meeting. Let's finish this, then we can go find some cake.
That's a perfect illustration. The ego is the planner, the strategist. It manages the impulses. Then there's a third player, the superego.
Right. This sounds like the conscience, the inner critic.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The superego develops later, usually through internalizing the rules, values, and ideals of parents and society. It's got two parts. The conscience, which makes you feel guilty or ashamed if you do something wrong.
Okay.
And the ego ideal, which is your picture of the perfect self, the person you should be. It operates on the moral principle, striving for perfection, upholding the rules.
So it's the judge.
It acts as the judge of character, yeah. It warns the ego when the id is pushing for something unacceptable, causing anxiety or guilt.
So back to the cake example. Id wants cake now. Ego says later, after the meeting. Superego chimes in with cake again. That's terrible for you. Think of the calories. You should be eating salad.
Haha, yes. That captures the dynamic perfectly. It's this constant negotiation, this push and pull. And here's a key point the sources emphasize. Even though the superego is the judge,
Yeah.
it's the ego that's actually the executive of personality, the CEO, if you like. The ego makes the final call weighs the demands of the id, the reality of the situation, and the rules of the superego, and then decides what to do.
Wow, the ego has a tough job. Sounds exhausting.
It's a constant balancing act. And Freud believed that how well our ego develops and how these three structures interact is heavily shaped by our journey through a series of developmental stages in childhood.
Ah, the psychosexual stages.
Right.
These are pretty famous and sometimes controversial, right?
Very much so. Freud's idea was that personality develops as our primary source of pleasure, our libido, shifts focus to different parts of the body. Now, libido often gets translated just as sexual energy, but the sources mention its Latin roots are broader, about longing, desire, and others, like Jung, saw it more as general psychic or life energy. But for Freud, the physical focus was key.
And if you had trouble navigating a particular stage.
You could get stuck. That's fixation. If a child experienced too much frustration, or maybe even too much gratification, at a certain stage, Freud thought some of that libidinal energy could remain tied up there.
And that affects your adult personality.
That was the theory, yes. It could lead to behaviors or personality traits in adulthood that reflect the issues of that earlier stage.
Okay, let's run through the main stages briefly. It starts with the oral stage.
Correct. From birth to about 18 months. The focus is the mouth, lips, tongue, gums. Pleasure comes from sucking, biting, tasting. Feeding is central.
Makes sense for a baby.
And the sources point out that this is where the infant has its first real experience of ambivalence, that mix of love and frustration, affection and hostility, often towards the caregiver, especially around weaning, getting needs met versus being denied.
And fixation here could lead to...
Freud linked it to adult issues around dependency, gullibility, maybe being passive if needs were overly met or denied early, or being argumentative, sarcastic, dominating, linked to the later biting phase. Oral fixations.
Okay. After oral comes...
the anal stage. Roughly 18 months to 3 years, libido shifts to the anus, and the big event is toilet training.
Ah, the power struggles begin.
Exactly. It's often the child's first major encounter with external authority demanding control over an instinctual urge. Learning to delay gratification. How parents handle this was seen as crucial.
So fixation here, what might that look like?
Two main types described. If the child rebels against harsh training by being messy, it could lead to being an anal aggressive type, disorganized, wasteful, maybe defiant. If they resist by holding back, reacting to strictness, it might lead to an anal retentive personality, excessively orderly, stingy, stubborn, obsessed with control.
Cleanliness, orderliness, or the opposite. Got it. Next stage.
The phallic stage, around 3 to 6 years. Now the focus shifts to the genitals. Kids get curious about the physical differences between boys and girls, about birth. And this is where Freud introduced his most, well, complex and debated ideas.
The Oedipus and Electra complexes.
Precisely. The Oedipus complex for boys' unconscious desire for the mother, seeing the father as a rival, leading to fear and eventual identification with the father. And the parallel Electra complex for girls, desire for the father, rivalry with the mother, eventually identifying with her.
And this is where things like castration anxiety and penis envy come in.
Yes, castration anxiety was the boy's supposed fear that the rival father would punish him by castration. Penis envy was the controversial idea that girls feel inferior because they lack a penis, envy males, and blame their mothers.
And it's crucial to say the sources do note the heavy criticism here.
Absolutely essential. The sources clearly state that these concepts, especially penis envy, and the related idea that girls develop weaker superegos because of this process, have been widely criticized, particularly by feminists, as sexist. Much of modern psychology views these ideas very differently or rejects them outright.
So we understand them as part of Freud's original theory from the sources, but with a huge asterisk regarding current views and critiques.
Exactly, a very important distinction.
Okay, after the intensity of the phallic stage, what happens?
Things calm down in the latency stage from about 6 to 12 years. Freud saw the libido as becoming dormant, sort of receding into the unconscious. The child's energy gets channeled into schoolwork, making friends, developing skills, hobbies. Social and cognitive growth takes center stage.
A period of relative quiet.
Relatively, yes. Identification shifts more towards peers rather than just parents. Then finally comes the genital stage.
Starting with puberty.
Right around age 12 and onwards into adulthood. Sexual urges reawaken, but now the focus is on directing them towards others, forming mature sexual relationships and identity.
So development is about navigating these stages, resolving the conflicts, managing that ego-superego dynamic. It sounds like conflict is just baked into the system.
It really is. And according to Freud, where there's internal conflict, There's anxiety.
Anxiety. That's a big one in his theory.
Central. He saw anxiety as this unpleasant state of tension, like an internal alarm bell. It signals danger to the ego and motivates us to do something about it. It arises directly from those clashes between id, ego, and superego.
It's a warning signal.
A crucial warning signal. And the sources outline three main types he described.
Okay, what are they?
First, realistic anxiety, sometimes called objective anxiety. This is straightforward fear of a real, genuine threat in the external world.
Like seeing a bear in the woods.
Exactly. The fear is proportional to the actual danger. You react. That's adaptive.
Makes sense. What's next?
Neurotic anxiety. This is different. It's the fear that your id's impulses, those forbidden desires or aggressive urges, might get too strong and overwhelm your ego. The fear is that you'll lose control and do something that gets you punished or causes problems.
So it's anxiety about your own inner drives breaking through.
Precisely. The example from the sources is like wanting to keep studying, id, but worrying you'll fail the test. If you give in, ego's fear of consequences. It's the id versus ego conflict generating the fear.
Okay. Fear of inner chaos. And the third type?
Moral anxiety. This is the fear of violating your own moral code, the fear of your superego. It manifests as guilt or shame when you think about or do something that goes against your internalized values.
Like feeling bad about wanting to cheat.
Yes. The source example was wanting to keep a lost wallet, idly impulse, but feeling intense guilt because the superego says stealing is wrong. That guilt is the moral anxiety, conflict between id and superego.
So, realistic, external danger. Neurotic, fear of overwhelming ego, and moral, fear of superego guilt. That ego is constantly dealing with potential threats from inside and out. How does it manage all this anxiety?
Well, that leads us to another cornerstone of Freud's theory, the ego defense mechanisms.
Right. These are ways the ego protects itself.
Exactly. There are unconscious strategies the ego uses automatically to distort reality, substitute feelings, or block sources of anxiety that arise from those id-ego-superego conflicts or from external stress.
Unconscious strategy. So we don't even know we're doing it.
Generally, no. They operate outside awareness. And the sources point out a few key things. They can be helpful, adaptive in moderation, but overuse or rigid use can be pathological. People often use several at once. And importantly, they're employed by the ego, not the superego that's a common mix-up.
Okay, the ego is doing the defending. There seem to be quite a few of these mentioned in the sources. Let's hit some key ones. Repression feels like the main one.
It's considered the most fundamental. Repression is the ego, actively but unconsciously, pushing threatening or unacceptable thoughts, memories, feelings, impulses right out of conscious awareness, banishing them to the unconscious.
Shoving it down deep?
Pretty much. The source example was not consciously recognizing a friend who ended up marrying someone you loved. The pain is too great, so the memory or recognition gets repressed.
Okay. How is that different from denial?
Denial is more about refusing to acknowledge a threatening external reality. It's not pushing an internal feeling down so much as refusing to accept what's happening outside. You just don't see it or accept it as true.
Like pretending something isn't happening.
Right. The source example is stark. A patient with a terminal diagnosis making elaborate plans for the distant future, denying the reality of their illness.
Got it. What about defenses that involve other people, like projection?
Projection is when you unconsciously attribute your own unacceptable thoughts, feelings, or motive onto someone else. You can't accept that you feel angry, so you perceive others as being angry at you.
So you see your own stuff in them.
Exactly. The source used that Korean proverb, a dog with shit on it is a dog with shit on it. Basically, you see your own faults in others. Or blaming your boss for your mistake because admitting it yourself causes too much anxiety.
Okay. Is introjection the flip side of that?
In a sense, yes. With introjection, instead of putting your feelings onto others, you take external feelings or characteristics into yourself. Often, it involves internalizing the attitudes or feelings directed towards an external person, especially if expressing them outwardly feels dangerous.
How does that work?
The source gives a powerful example linked to depression. Hating yourself, because hating a powerful figure like a parent feels unacceptable to the ego. You turn the hostility inward.
Wow, that's heavy. Turning negativity inward. What about reaction formation? That sounds like doing the opposite.
It is. Reaction formation is where you defend against an unacceptable impulse by acting out the extreme opposite. Someone struggling with hostile feelings might become overly, almost sickeningly, nice and solicitous. The exaggerated behavior masks the underlying unacceptable feeling.
Like being excessively polite to someone you secretly dislike.
Could be, yeah. Then there's displacement.
Shifting feelings.
Right. Redirecting an impulse, often anger or aggression from the original, threatening target to a safer, less threatening one. You're angry at your boss, but you can't yell at them.
So you go home and yell at the dog.
Or kick the furniture. That's classic displacement. The sources use the proverb, when you get slapped in Jongno, you glare at the Han River, taking it out on something unrelated and safe.
Taking it out elsewhere. Okay. And rationalization sounds like making excuses.
It is, but sophisticated ones. Rationalization involves creating logical-sounding, socially acceptable explanations for behaviors or feelings that actually stem from unacceptable unconscious motives. It makes you feel better about why you did something.
Justifying it after the fact.
Exactly. The sources mention types like sour grapes. I didn't really want that job anyway after being rejected. Or sweet lemon, finding the good in a bad situation you can't change. The student blaming bad luck for failing an exam they didn't study for is another example.
Finding a good reason, even if it's not the real reason, it really seems like these mechanisms are the ego's toolkit for just surviving the internal pressure.
That's a great way to put it. They help manage the I'd's demands, soothe the superego's judgments, and keep anxiety at bay, often unconsciously. There are many others mentioned, like intellectualization, compensation, undoing.
Right, lots of strategies. But the sources specifically highlighted sublimation as different, more mature.
Yes, sublimation is considered the most mature and constructive defense. It involves channeling unacceptable impulses like aggression or sexual energy into activities that are personally and socially acceptable, even valuable.
How so?
Instead of repressing aggression, you might channel it into competitive sports. Instead of acting on forbidden desires, you might create art or music. The source example is an aggressive person becoming a boxer. You're not just blocking or displacing the energy, you're transforming it.
So it turns a potential negative into a positive. That makes sense as mature.
It's seen as the healthiest way to manage those powerful drives.
This whole system, the hidden unconscious, the internal conflicts, the defenses, it really paints a picture where our behavior isn't always what it seems on the surface. It points to deeper causes.
Absolutely. And that leads directly into Freud's concept of psychodeterminism.
Determinism, meaning our actions are determined by something.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
The core idea is that all human behavior, thoughts, feelings, even slips of the tongue or seemingly random accidents have a psychological cause. Nothing is truly random. And for Freud, those causes are often unconscious.
And where do those causes mostly come from, according to him?
The sources are very clear on this. Freud heavily emphasized early childhood experiences, especially everything that happens before age 5 or 6. He believed our fundamental personality structure is largely set during that time. The past is paramount.
So who we are as adults is fundamentally shaped, maybe even determined by our earliest years, often in ways we don't consciously grasp.
That's the essence of his psychodeterministic view. Present problems, patterns of behavior, relationship issues, they're seen as having roots in past experiences, unresolved conflicts, fixations at certain developmental stages, unconscious desires. It's kind of linear causality. Past causes, present effects. And this viewpoint, the sources note, had a significant influence, particularly on the diagnostic school of thought in social work back in the 1920s. The focus became diagnosing the client's present problem by uncovering its roots in their personal history.
Understanding the past to fix the present. It offered a framework. Now, we've talked about the power and influence of these ideas, but we also have to address the criticisms. We mentioned sexism earlier. What other big challenges to Freud's theory do the sources bring up?
There are quite a few major ones. One big critique is that the theory portrays humans as rather passive beings, kind of pushed around by unconscious drives and past events. Critics argue it doesn't give enough weight to conscious choice, free will, or the impact of ongoing social and environmental factors.
So not enough focus on personal agency or the present situation?
That's a common criticism, yes. Related to that, some feel it presents a generally negative or pessimistic view of human nature. The focus is often on conflict, pathology, irrationality, the darker side, rather than on growth, resilience, or positive potential.
Always looking for the problem.
Some interpretations lean that way. Another major point is the overemphasis on sex, eros, and aggression, thanatos, as the primary motivators. Critics argue that human motivation is far more complex and involves many other needs and drives.
Like needs for connection, meaning, self-actualization, things beyond just sex and aggression.
Exactly. And we've already covered the very significant sexist critiques, particularly around the phallic stage concepts like penis envy and the view of female development, which the sources rightly flag as highly problematic and largely rejected today.
Absolutely. What about scientifically?
That's perhaps the biggest hurdle for Freudian theory in the modern era. Many of its core concepts, the id, the ego, the superego, the unconscious itself, repression, are incredibly difficult, maybe impossible to scientifically verify or falsify.
Hard to measure the unconscious.
Very hard. Much of Freud's evidence came from his own interpretations of his patients' reports and his reconstructions of their childhoods. While insightful, it lacks the objective empirical methods required by science. The theory is more of a rich interpretive framework than testable scientific model.
So, based more on observation and interpretation than on controlled experiments.
Right. And as the sources mention, even early followers like Jung broke away partly on these grounds, seeing libido differently, for instance.
Okay, so those are some significant limitations and critiques. But despite all that, the sources also stress that Freud's work did have a really positive and lasting impact, didn't it? Especially in fields like social work.
Oh, undoubtedly. Even with the critiques, his ideas were revolutionary. He gave practitioners powerful insights into the idea that there are unseen, unconscious motivations driving behavior. That was huge.
It opened up a whole new way of thinking about why people struggle.
Exactly. For social workers, it provided a new lens for assessment. It encouraged them to look beyond the surface symptoms or presenting problems and consider the client's internal psychological world.
Digging deeper.
Yes. He highlighted the existence of the unconscious, the crucial role of the ego in navigating reality, the way defense mechanisms operate. And critically, he forced the helping professions to recognize the profound importance of early childhood experiences in shaping adult functioning.
Understanding the roots.
Right. His work underscored the power of human instincts, the reality of unconscious processes, and the impact of the past on the present. It fundamentally changed the conversation in psychology and related fields.
So even if many specific ideas have been revised or replaced, the core notion that our inner, often hidden world matters profoundly, that seems to be his enduring legacy.
I think that's fair to say. He provided a complex, sometimes controversial, but undeniably influential map of the inner landscape. The questions he asked about why we behave as we do, pointing to those hidden internal reasons, are still incredibly relevant.
We've really covered a lot of ground mapping the mind's levels, meeting the id, ego, and superego, tracing those developmental stages, understanding anxiety's role, and exploring the ego's unconscious defenses.
It's a dense framework. And while, as we've said, parts are debated or viewed differently now, you can't deny that Freud fundamentally shifted how we think about ourselves.
Acknowledging the critiques is vital, of course. But the value might lie in those core questions he raised about hidden motives, about the past's influence, about internal conflict.
He cracked open the door to exploring the psychological depths.
Okay, so thinking about this whole internal drama, the id's demands, the ego's negotiations, the superego's judgments, the anxiety that pops up, and especially those automatic unconscious defense mechanisms we use. Here's something for you, our listener, to maybe reflect on. In your own daily life, have you ever caught yourself in a moment where, looking back, you think you might have been using one of those defenses? Maybe rationalizing something, or displacing frustration, or denying something uncomfortable? In what kinds of situations do you notice yourself, perhaps unconsciously, trying to protect yourself from difficult feelings or internal clashes? Just mulling that over could offer some really interesting personal insights into your own hidden dynamics.